Good morning. This is Ladena again from Stockton, Missouri, and I'm here on my show, Trials and Triumphs. Last week, I started to give my testimony about why I felt qualified to do this particular show, and I'm going to try to finish that up today. Last week was a lot about my home life when I was younger and things that had happened, and so there we touched on abuse, mental, physical abuse, verbal abuse, and some sexual trauma. I had left home and ultimately married one of my high school sweethearts. And we had a son. Um, things got a little calm at that point. My mother didn't meet my son till he was 4 months old. My father actually came to the hospital when he was born, and since he was a bicentennial baby, brought him bicentennial silver dollars and quarters and stuff to have for later in life, just to remember. But my parents, things calmed down with them for a little bit. And then uh, about 3 years into my marriage, all the fights between my parents started up again. And my mother and my sister moved into my home. So at that point, I ended up with an alcoholic husband, a toddler, and my mother and my sister living in my home. And I was self-employed, trying to type court transcripts and so forth. And it was rough. And so I bailed. I left, moved in with a friend of mine, and got a divorce. I didn't want my son exposed to all of that because, like I said last week, you learn what you live. And I didn't want my son to learn that it was okay to get drunk and pass out on the floor every day. And I didn't want him to learn various things with my mother and my sister and the fights over there. So, anyway, I got a divorce. I got into another relationship. He was older and in the Air Force Reserves, but he was doing it full time. Um, After we got together, though, he decided he didn't want to be without me. And so he quit his job. So I was trying to support myself, a kid, and a husband, getting paid by the page. I was getting 25 cents a page for typing. Luckily, I typed very quickly. Um, I couldn't continue supporting people this way. And so I ultimately asked him to leave, and he moved out to Utah. We're still friends. We communicate on Facebook and so forth. And, he actually helped pay for my son's funeral when he died a few years back. So, and I'm still friendly with my first husband. You know, I learned what I lived in my childhood, but I also determined in my own mind to make a change. I didn't want these things following my children and myself for the rest of our life. Now, I wasn't very good at that, not initially anyway. The gentleman I was involved with, he left and went to Utah. And then I met another guy who I was set up on a blind date. And he and I got together. We got married on my birthday one year, 1984. And he was also an alcoholic. He was also into a lot of drugs. And he had a violent temper. Um, he slapped me around. He broke my arm a couple of times. My chiropractor thought I'd been in a car wreck, but it was just from being slammed on concrete floors in my house. It was a difficult time. And I didn't want my children watching this because I didn't want my son to think it was okay to hit a woman. And I didn't want my daughter to think that she would grow up tolerating that. I didn't want her to think that's the way things were. So before long, he had got a couple of DWIs and so forth, and his dog had bit the neighbor. So I was going to, and my house payments were behind and so forth. So anyway, ultimately, I asked him to go back to his grandparents' house and stay because I couldn't afford to have him in my home. Um, And it was very dangerous, I thought, for myself. My daughter did not have too much of a relationship with her father until recently. She did see him a few times over the years, but whenever her father and I got divorced, because of all the police reports and all that was put into evidence, the judge set visitation on his own, and he said visitation would be every other Sunday from 2 to 4 in the afternoon in the lobby of the Independence Police Department with a police officer present. Since there were still 2 warrants for his arrest, he said visitation would be real short. Um, I always wanted my daughter to know her father because when he was sober, he was a very awesome man. He was good to people around him. He made sure that he took care of his mother and so forth. And he and I have now developed a new friendship. He is in a nursing home with ALS. So, nobody should have to go through that either. It's a very horrible disease. But, you have to learn to step past anything that was bad in your life in order to continue on and do everything that you are capable of doing or that the Lord has put on your heart to do. You know, um, anyway, shortly after my daughter's father left, I was trying to make up the difference on getting all the bills paid. I was working, 48 hours straight on occasion just to get the money together. Well, another neighbor set me up on a date. Um, this one happened to be an alcoholic and a drug addict. Also, I was swore for years. I was walking around with a sign on my forehead that said "Losers apply here." You know, it, it got to be pretty tiring. But anyway, he decided he wanted to go back to Colorado, and I've not spoken with him since. But it was an interesting time to say the least, and um, but I didn't feel safe. The only thing about him is the fact that he was bigger than my ex-husband. Let's find somebody bigger each time, so that if somebody tries to hurt me, there's somebody that's supposed to protect me. Um, it didn't work out too well for me, but that's the way that one goes. Um, Whenever somebody hit me, I always figured it was my issue if I stayed. If I tolerated it, that was on me. The problem is if somebody hit my son. My daughter's father hit my son and knocked him all the way across the room. And as soon as that started happening, I went into attack mode, I guess you'd say. You hit me, that's my fault. You hit my kids, and there's going to be an issue. And so I didn't want children to suffer the way I had as a child. I didn't want girls to learn that abuse is to be tolerated. I didn't want my son to know that he should ever hit a woman. Um, and so, that's the way I lived my life. And then as soon as my kids and I were on our own once again, well, then my kids started bringing home other kids. My kids have always called me on Mother's Day and Father's Day because they always said that I was the only father they knew. Um, and, that made my heart feel good. And then since my kids never brought home dogs and cats, they brought home other kids. Well, then I ended up with a lot of extras in my house. Um, I've never understood why some people think that children are throwaway items, but whenever I was up in Kansas City, that seemed to be the case. Um, my son brought home Crips and Bloods and Latin counts. Um, I was familiar with a lot of the gang members around the area where we lived. I took a number of them into my home, but there was always the understanding that you leave your gang affiliations outside. There's none of that coming into my home, and it will not be tolerated. Um, Over the years, I took in over 90 kids. They would say anywhere from 3 months to 10 years. One boy who lived with us, his mother used to live across the street, and she packed up and moved, and she didn't even leave us a forwarding address or anything. Um, I had kids show up at my door that didn't have coats in the cold and needed a meal, and so we brought them in. My kids and I brought every one of them in there that needed something. Um, as soon as I moved from that area and my son got old enough, I ended up taking in girls at that point. Before that, it was mainly boys, um, high school age boys, and we got past all gang affiliations. And, I know every one of them has since come to Christ and they've stopped their gangs, um, the ones that are still alive anyway. The other thing that happened during this period of time is my son was in high school and he was being bullied quite frequently. He had a group of boys who drive up beside him one day when he was walking home from school and picked him up and threw him in a mud puddle. And, they terrorized him and one of the other boys on a daily basis. Uh, I went to school then, I was very mama bear and spoke with the principal about it. And so, in order to find a solution to that particular issue, because the guy who had done it was the star football player, um, the solution was that that young man came to my house every day and walked my son to school and then met him every afternoon and walked him home. It didn't take but just a few weeks of that, and the bullying stopped at that point. Uh, he was lucky in that respect because I know a lot of people that have been bullied unmercifully through school and told how little they amount to anything. And, I don't want anybody to ever feel that way. And that's one of the reasons my ministry, I go out and I see people, I see drug addicts, I see alcoholics, I see Alzheimer's patients, um, just a wide selection of people because I know what they've been through, or, I have a way of communicating with them. I spent 30 years managing a law firm and working as paralegal up in Kansas City. And that's the other thing that saved me is the fact that I ended up finding a way to help people and um, being able to get them through situations and help when they had disabled children or needed a special needs trust, powers of attorney so that things can be handled. These are things that a lot of people don't think about, but they were important. And it also gave me access to a bunch of disabled children that helped fill my heart. You know, um, those are the things that healed my heart and brought me through. Because the Lord gave me all the children I wanted at that point. Actually, some days it gave me more than I wanted, but it was a good time. Um, but I ended up with one boyfriend though, and he decided that I had been raped. I got raped shortly thereafter all of this started. Um, it's not anything I ever reported to the police. It's something that I kept in my own heart and my own mind. And I ultimately did speak with a counselor about it. And um, I had a lot of bills come due at that point. So I had to figure out how to go about paying my bills, getting past this rape, getting past, all the other things that had gone on in my life. And so since I had to pay these bills, I did the only thing I could at that point to make quite a bit of money in a short period of time. I didn't want to lose my house, didn't want my kids homeless. And so I ended up taking a job as an exotic dancer. Most people just say stripper. Um, Rough time. I know that there's a lot of girls right now that take up pole dancing lessons and I've heard so many of them talk about, they wanted to be a stripper because they saw it on a movie and it looked so cool. And I want to tell you, it's not cool. If you work as an exotic dancer, they don't pay you. You pay them in order to get on their stage. You buy your own drinks or get somebody to buy them. Um, you you take out of your money and tip the waitresses and the bartenders. You're given a can to go around each night and collect money for the jukebox. The problem there is the jukebox was on autopilot all the time and there was no need to collect money. But if you didn't collect enough, well, then you had to take the money out of your tips in order to do it. If you wanted a security guard to walk you to your car after you got off work, you had to pay him to do it. This is not a job that should really intrigue any girl. It's demeaning. It's disheartening. Most of the girls I know had to get drunk in order to get through their shift. I know myself personally, I had to walk in and get me a drink before I could even think about getting in there. Um, it was depressing. So I want any girl out there that is thinking about doing this, think again. If you want to be a dancer, take up ballet or something. Get into something other than exposing yourself to people by dancing on a pole or something. It's um, not something that you will enjoy. And most of the girls I knew there ended up being drug addicts. The younger ones kept thinking that they would meet some guy who would take them out of there. They had this visions of Pretty Woman in their mind or something. And that's probably not going to happen. You know, um, there are some great girls that dance there, college students trying to make ends meet, a kindergarten teacher, just all different types of women who work there. But the thing I saw worst was whenever the young girls came in and they became drug addicts. They would have to have cocaine or something all the time in order to get through. And that's just not the way you want to live your life. Anyway, 6 months later, I could make $500 to $1,500 a night, depending on what kind of crowds we had. So it didn't take long to get my bills caught up and get back on my feet and go back to just working at the law firm again. And those are things that I went through at that point. Luckily, I didn't get hurt while I was there, though that is always a thing that does happen in the parking lots. I have a stepdaughter who worked as a dancer from probably the time she was 17 until she's in her 30s. And, she's been raped 4 times. Um, she's gone through a lot of heartache because of that job. Now she's doing well. She's moved away from where she was, and she's back to where she can, um, relax in life a little bit. So, anyway, this time also, my mother and father went off the deep end again. My mother was mad because I quit the stripping job, and she wanted me to help her pay her tax bills and things like that. Um, and so then I told her I couldn't do that. I had kids to support, that she had no right asking me that. And so it was just a difficult time. And so her and my father started fighting again. By this point, they'd been married for 39 years. And my mother decided to start hitting on my father one day. And he called me after a few hours and said, I can't do anything with her. I need you to come over. So I went over that day, and my mother climbed out a bathroom window, and we had to call the police to come and find her. because we wanted to put her in a psych ward to see what was going on, because she had numerous prescriptions from different doctors, and some of them were counteracting other ones, so it was very difficult to make her understand what she was doing. Um, but the police finally found her, and they wanted to take her to a psych ward, which was fine. But my sister showed up about that time and got my mother riled up in the backseat of a car. And so she got out, and it ended up in a bigger nightmare than it started, because by the night, both my parents were in jail. Um, I asked my father if he wanted me to bail him out, and he said yes. He just soon not stay there. Neither of them had ever been in jail before. And my mom sent up an officer that said, leave her there, and then asked me what her social security number was. Um, that started 10 years of major issues. My father and mother finally ended up with a legal separation, but my mother um, kept trying to accuse my father of messing with her car and all this other stuff. And actually, the truth of the matter is that she flattened my father's tires 29 times with an ice pick through the wall. She flattened my tires, all four of them, one day, because I was going for a protective order against her and my sister. And so we spent a lot of time in the tire repair shop during that period. And, they finally got divorced, and 10 years later, and my father moved to Stockton, and my mother's still up there in the Kansas City area. Um, it was just very difficult, because I was raising my own kids, and I was raising a lot of other kids. And here I was trying to play referee between my mother and my father. And it was difficult. And, my sister was completely on my mother's side. And so, when my mother went off the deep end and was threatening to kill herself, her attorney had called me during the divorce and asked me if I would go to her house and meet the police officers, because she thought my mother was going to harm herself. And I didn't want to go, and I told her so. I said she doesn't want to see me, but the attorney knew me because I'd been working for attorneys for a lot of years by that point, and so I was fairly well known. And I taught courses to attorneys and paralegals and insurance agents. So I finally agreed to go over there, and the police were asking me. I didn't set foot in my mother's yard. But the police were asking me if they thought that she would shoot somebody. And I said, I don't have a clue. I said, I don't even know if she's got guns in there. Well, my sister showed up about that time, and they asked her the same question. And she said, send her up there. You'll find out pretty quick. And pointed at me. It was okay for her if mom shot me. But, the last view I had that day was police officers busting down the door and carrying my mother out by her arms and legs and putting her in a paddy wagon. She did go to the psych ward there for a few weeks, and we got through that. And I tried to stay out of the situation as much as possible, because during this time also, my son's still in high school, and like I said, I had Bloods and Counts and Latin Counts and Crips in my home. Um, while they are all still alive and well today, I have to say, though, that my son and I ended up going to 32 funerals during his high school years. These are children who were murdered, or they committed suicide, or drug overdoses. One young lady, she was pregnant, and um, she was shot twice in the head, and they shot her 5 times in her stomach. Um, you know, there's too much violence in the world. There's too many things going wrong. And, we need to reach out to these kids and teach them something different, because of the 32 deaths, my son became an alcoholic. when his best friend, the first one was his best friend, and he'd gone to school. And whenever he got to school, I called to see what was going on because I had just been informed that his best friend had not gone to school that day and had instead sat at home, pulled out his father's shotgun, and shot himself in the head. Um, he's such a beautiful boy, but he felt like he was never going to fit in because he liked country music and everybody up there was into hip hop. He had very short hair, and my son's was halfway down his back. Um, you know, we can't let these children think they do not belong somewhere and that they're never going to fit in. It breaks their hearts, it breaks their minds, and so too many suicides these days among young people, too many murders among young people. These are all things that I've experienced through the years, and to think that in just one short 4-year period of high school, to go find 32 children dead just in one small area of South Kansas City. Things like that should not be occurring. We should be able to reach out to these kids and bring them some peace and some comfort and show them something different than what they may have experienced up until this time. Um, that's part of the things that I do with my ministry. I make it a point to talk to the drug addicts, to talk to the alcoholics, to talk to the teenage girls that are pregnant, or the ones who are in bad marriages, like I got into, where they're being abused or they're being talked to where it just breaks down your mental capacity, and you think that you deserve this. You never deserve somebody hurting you. Um, and just to move on a little bit past that, over the years, because of everything I've gone through, I have extreme back pain and back injury. The chiropractor, after my daughter's father left, thought I'd been in a car wreck, and it's like, no, I just got married. And he liked to slam people down, and he couldn't believe it. And we talk about a bad health diagnosis. Well, I've had a hysterectomy, an appendectomy. I've had 5 carpal tunnel surgeries on my arms. I've had Decker veins releases on both my arms. I've had to have my shoulder repaired. I have a cadaver bone in my neck, where my neck was broken uh, during a job where I was working as a cook, and a spaghetti pot fell on my head. Um, I had my brain tumor removed last year. I had quadruple bypass surgery 6 years ago. Um, you know, just various things like that. Fibromyalgia, GERD, just all kinds of different things going on. And I have to say that the Lord has helped me get off a lot of my medications using natural remedies. Um, and, you know, I am able to do more than I could have had I not switched off of the heavy medications that the doctors had me on and went on to more natural products. I've seen what all of this does to people. But anyway, my son ultimately became an alcoholic, ended up with 5 DWIs, and ultimately in 2019, he died of a major heart attack. When I say people are mean, I want you to understand one of the other things that makes me say that is because my son had gone out to get coffee at McDonald's that day and was driving home and was feeling sick. So he pulled into a Family Dollar parking lot and was sitting there and started to get out of the truck. And the people inside the store saw him get out of his truck. And then they saw him fall back into the truck. And they didn't do anything, they didn't check on him. I'm one that, since we rented our parking lot to a bar when I was at the law firm, I come in the morning and find people that way hanging out of their cars. I've always made it a point to go check on them and see what happened, call authorities, whatever the case may be. The people at the Family Dollar waited 5 hours before calling the police to say there's a man in the parking lot with the truck still running. And by that point, he had died. If they had checked on him whenever they first saw the situation, he might still be with us today. It's hard to say, but it was one of the things that hurt my heart is the fact that people are neglecting those that they come in contact with. When did we become so mean? You know, I have never understood that in my life because when I was young, everybody got along. You know, there was issues everywhere. Somebody's always got an issue, but you know, you reached out and helped your neighbor, and you reached out and helped those you came in contact with. And for some reason, we have fallen so far away from that, and we need to get it back. There's no reason for us to allow so much hurt in our life and in our world today. Um, I had a car wreck, and I ended up, that's when they found my brain tumor and so forth. And there was a lot of damage to my car and to the people in my car. But you don't let those things get you down. You have to move past them. You've got, you know, if you've got some bills that are taking you down and you can't seem to find a way out, you know, is it appropriate to take bankruptcy? I did. I had to. There was no way I could continue supporting my children if I didn't at one point. Um, you know, if you've got people that have died in your life and you can't get past that grief, reach out to someone. You know, there is no reason to live in agony or to use the excuse that, well, my parents did this when I was growing up and, you know, I've never gotten over it. There's no reason not to get over it. You know, my parents did not uh, have a happy home, and I was never raised in a happy home. I went through a lot of physical abuse and so forth, as I said, but I would always refuse to allow to let that happen to me. And I always said that I would never raise my children or anybody else's child the way that I was raised because I want children to be happy and I want them to understand that you don't have to go through the same things again. Don't repeat past mistakes that you suffered through. Um, I'm on disability, so and that's because I've had 5 surgeries on my arms, and the between the fibromyalgia and all the carpal tunnel surgeries and stuff, I was told I couldn't type anymore, and that I needed to quit my job. You know, so I had to go through that and suffer for a few years financially until, you know, because it took 7 years for me to get my disability approved. You know, I have lost my father to cancer. I lost a grandmother to cancer. I lost a grandfather to two grandfathers to heart attacks. Um, you know, there's been the drowning of my aunt and uncle that was still disturbs me to this day. But you know, at least I know that they're in heaven because I knew they knew the Lord before their deaths. Now, I've not been homeless, but I've met with a lot of homeless people over the years. You know, Becky Code was my guest a few big weeks back. She and her husband were both in the alcohol very heavily at one point, and they've all gotten past that. And Dennis was such a wonderful minister to the homeless people. Um, I've I am medicated for depression, but I have to say I'm probably the happiest depressed person you'll ever run into. Um, I've dealt with addictions to drugs and alcohol in my life. I was not addicted, but you know, I had 2 husbands that were. Um, I have members of my family who have muscular dystrophy. My niece had muscular dystrophy, and she just died of cancer last week. She was only 35. Well, excuse me, last year, last November, she was only 35. And I had to sit back and see this. I've had a lot of people in my life that have just given up because of bad health diagnosis and have committed suicide.
Um, the older ones, they had always made their intentions clear, um, but we didn't really believe it until after they had actually committed suicide. But they didn't want to go through the cancer treatments and so forth. And so while I don't blame them, it breaks my heart that they thought that was the only thing they could do because there was no one around to help them, reach out to people. Um, since I took in the 90 kids and then, you know, they all still call me mom. They all still come and see me. Their grandkids call me grandma, or I mean, their kids call me grandma. And that always makes my heart feel good that they felt safe enough to come and be there and get past what they lived before. Um, these are things that you need to be conscious of. You need to give love and attention to those who require it. Everybody you come in contact with requires it, though. Um, I've had to learn to deal with suicides for young people, suicides for old people. Um, I know some friends of mine that, well, I'll call them friends. They're actually friends of my daughter's, but I've known them for a number of years. And my daughter's only 36, and two of them, her friends, are in prison now for murder. One for murder, one for manslaughter, and they're serving life in prison, and they've been there since they were like 22. You know, if somebody had shown them the love and attention they needed when they were younger, maybe they wouldn't be there. They definitely did wrong, and they have come to grips with the fact that they'll be in prison for the rest of their life. But they'll often say, if things had been different, if I had gotten past these things in my life, then maybe I wouldn't be here. We need to think about those around us. These days, I take care of. I don't get paid for any of it, but I take care of Alzheimer's patients and military veterans who have PTSD, and nobody wants to go around and check on them and make sure they're happy because they're afraid. And one of the things I always tell my grandchildren is, if you're afraid, then do it afraid. Because I have a granddaughter with extreme anxiety disorder. I have a grandson who is autistic. Um, I have another granddaughter who went through a lot of bullying, and her parents were both addicts, and so forth. You met her a few weeks ago here. But, there's a lot of things that happen in the world that you just have to remember the Lord is still with you. And if you take that little bit of time to accept that and understand what the Lord is doing for you, nothing that's bad that happened in your life needs to affect you today. I don't allow all the stuff that went on in my life, all the beatings and all the alcohol and drugs and, just being flat broke to affect me. I was able to move past that and instead reach out to others. And that's my entire calling in life, is to reach out to others and make you understand there is a way up, there is a way out. Um, and just, you have to learn to love yourself. That's the biggest thing. Um, I figured that I am the way I am because the way I was raised and the things I've done and my determination not to repeat those mistakes. And that's what I want anybody to take away from our time here on Trials and Triumphs. Yeah, bad things happen, but that's no reason to be depressed and to repeat the mistakes that other people made with you. Move past that, change your life, and stand up in triumph over everything that's gone in the past. And you can talk about them, and you can tell funny stories about it, and you can laugh and just move on with things. Don't get buried in the bad things. There's too much good in the world, and we need to make more good in the world. And that's really my point here. The Lord put me here to help bring people out of the situations I have been in and to help others. And, uh, we hope that this show does that for you, because there's no reason for all of us to have so much hate and discontent around us. If we change our attitude, even with one person, that help makes things better. And Lord knows that right now our United States is in a crazy situation. The entire world is going crazy right now. But if you stay focused on good, and if you stay focused on what the Lord has provided for you, you can get past all of it. Don't live in the past. Don't live in that hatred. Um, anyway, I believe our time is about up here. So I thank you for joining us. And hopefully next week we've got a guest that will touch your heart. So everyone, please have a blessed week. And thank you